Now less than 2 weeks away, we are rapidly approaching the release of PRB02 in the West. The official release for the set is the 3rd of October, that's next Friday, and it's coming not only with a whole host of new reprints of popular and expensive cards like Cavendish and Mr. 2, but also a whole bunch of new alt arts for fan favourites like Gravity Blade Raging Tiger and Lime Juice. But on top of that, more interestingly, we're getting 18 new cards in this set that are going to be exclusive to PRB02, at least for now. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the ramifications of those 18 new cards, which are all aimed at buffing older decks, and hopefully changing up the meta a bit. So starting off with the first card, we've got the Koby, and this Koby I think is pretty interesting in the format for a number of red decks. Obviously, primarily this is going to be a Koby card, really nice for that deck to have an extra 4 cost. We're also getting more support for this in EBO3, which is quite a way out, but that's pretty interesting if you've seen those. But for now, I think this Koby is going to fix one of the main issues that the Koby deck had, which was the card draw. With Koby, you regularly just ran out of cards, which was obviously not ideal, and this Koby having card draw built in on his when attacking is great. Also, being able to bop little chump blockers against decks like Bonney is going to make it easier for Koby to control the board. And this when attacking, popping a 3000 base power character, obviously also just incredible into Rayleigh, because most of their cards have 3000 or less base power. It's only really like the Luffy and the Rush cards that squeak past that. So Koby being able to immediately attack and potentially just remove one of Rayleigh's guys and draw a card for the privilege seems pretty good. And the fact that he can do that turn over turn if he's not dealt with is going to make it more tricky for your opponent to decide whether they want to regress face or try and deal with this Koby. Now, I don't think this is going to be a complete game changer for the deck. I don't think it's going to shoot up to tier 1 or anything. But this is a significant buff for Koby. And if I was going to play Koby in this format, I'd be starting out with a list a little bit like this one. And if you want to see some gameplay of Koby, check out my video that I made on Koby about a month ago in the card on your screen about now. But not only is this card going to be obviously very good in Koby, there's also room for experimenting with this card in Red-Green Smoker. So Red-Green Smoker is, again, another deck that has struggled a little bit with card draw. In the past, they've played cards like the 3-cost Sanji, which, when they go down, will draw you a card. But this will give Red-Green Smoker another option for card draw in its low end. Being Navy, obviously searchable off the Kujyaku searcher, which is one of a number of options that Smoker has available to him now. You're typically running 2 out of Vergo, Kujyaku, and Perona, depending on what sort of package you want to run in your deck. Also, again, helping you out with that Rayleigh matchup is much appreciated. Smoker can struggle into Rayleigh's aggression sometimes, so having this as a really good option to help you control Rayleigh's board a lot easier could be pretty powerful. It'll be interesting to see how RG Smoker builds update, and with how poorly he's been doing in the OP12 format in the West, he'll appreciate any bit of help he can get. Before we move on, small note that you could also play this in Shanks, but I'm less excited about it there because you already have a lot of 4-drops in Shanks in the Lucky Roux, the new Lucky Roux they're about to talk about, and of course the 4-cost Shanks. Also worth noting that in RG Smoker, this goes to 7k in your opponent's turn, which is kind of nuts. Moving on to another card that's going to benefit multiple decks, and I want to continue talking about RG Smoker first. This law is Punk Hazard and Slash, which means if you're running a Vergo and Perona engine, it's double searchable. Smoker has historically been a deck that really likes going first, playing out that 5-cost Smoker on 5, and then going from there. So it often felt like when you were on the going second curve and you were at 6 Don, well, you could still play that 5-cost Smoker, but you sort of just had a Don that was just kind of hanging around and didn't fit in with your core strategy. Well, this law offers sort of an alternative. If you're in a matchup where you need a little bit more power reduction to battle for board, maybe against something like a GP Luffy, this law is really useful. Being able to play him on 6, and the fact that your opponent really can't deal with this easily because of his once per turn effect, will mean that it's very, very likely to survive. And then on the following turn, you can bring down the power of one of your opponent's characters, whether that's a big blocker, like a Mihawk, in something like a Bonney matchup, or a Sanji and Pudding, bringing that down to 5 below the threshold of the GP Luffy leader, which is pretty useful for getting extra resources out of a deck like that. You can also combo this with Mole Pistol to remove 8 or 9,000 power characters, which isn't the biggest deal, but it is kind of cool. I do think this is very likely to be staple in a lot of Smoker builds, especially if you are running both the Vergo and Perona searchers, as having another double searchable target is just going to make your deck a lot more reliable. Sometimes an issue you can have with Red-Green Smoker is your searchers can reliably just whiff, because you've got about 20 cards of one archetype, 20 of the other, and then a few unsearchables. And whiffing a searcher in RG Smoker always felt really bad because of how few resources you have to start with. So I'm pretty excited to experiment more with this lore in Red-Green Smoker. Here's a starting list that I would potentially start with if you want to play Red-Green Smoker with this lore. And if you want to see some early Red-Green Smoker gameplay from PRB2, check out this video that's on a card on your screen now. One more deck that this lore may well fit in quite nicely to is Shanks. Control build of Shanks have sort of been looking for some kind of onboard power reduction for a while now. People play the stage. Stage kind of sucks because it's a brick and it's kind of slow. Well, this lore's not slow. It comes down on 6, which is a traditionally not great turn for Shanks. You're often doing something like Divine Departure or just playing maybe a Yasop or more recently Marco. But this lore coming down on 6, again, being unremovable by anything that might like to bounce it with a Jozu or remove it with a black combo perhaps, is really good. And then this can combo on the following turn with something like a Rayleigh or a Ben Beckman to help you remove an 8k power unit very, very easily. Into decks that might like to play Mihawks, like Green Zoro, this is pretty cool. Also at that 7k stat line, reasonably easy to defend from a Green Zoro that might like to swing into it. And the fact that this is likely to live multiple turns, so you get multiple uses of this when attacking, comboing with Ben Beckmans, and even pop Shanks to remove 12k power units, such as a Rush Shanks in a mirror later on, is pretty cool. I do think this is very likely to make its way into the control builds of Shanks, due to its versatility in buffing the reach of your removal pieces whilst also having counter, which is incredible. Moving on to another card for Shanks mainly is this new Lucky Roux. This is sort of a strict upgrade in specifically Shanks on the 5-cost Rayleigh. Obviously Lucky Roux is searchable off your Uta, and your Come On Will Fight You event, if you're choosing to play that. And this can help you with one of Shanks' more notorious aspects, is that he loves to brick up. Shanks plays a lot of big characters, and a lot of them do have no counter. Although that may be getting slightly better with the introduction of that lore. But Lucky Roux can help you trash excess Big Shanks, excess 9 Shanks, excess Rush Shanks, even cards like Rayleigh that you don't need. It's great. One of the main reasons I think this is a strict upgrade on the Rayleigh is because this can be played on curve. Obviously, you're not going to be excited to play this on curve, but on 4-Don, just dropping this, ditching, maybe you don't need a Rayleigh in this matchup, so you ditch a Rayleigh, get a couple draws, and you've got a little blocker here. It's pretty good. It's going to help you with your consistency with Shanks, although I don't foresee this coming in much more than about a 2 of. If you're interested in playing Shanks in PRB2, here's a build that you could start with, and there's also a video on your screen now with some early PRB2 gameplay. Lucky Roux will probably also find a home in something else because he is very generic, but at the moment I'm not really sure what that would be. The main red decks around at the minute are like Red-Green Smoker, Rayleigh. Rayleigh's definitely not playing this, and I think Red-Green Smoker would broadly just prefer to play the Bonney, the 5-cost secret Bonney. That draws the cards first, and you don't have to trash a specific card for its effect, and you get a Don back, which is lovely. So I do have more hope for the Bonney and Smoker than this Lucky Roux, but I'm sure in the future someone will find a good use for this outside of Shanks, just because it's so generic. Moving on, next up we've got this 3-cost Bonney, and this is looking pretty good for Red-Green Luffy and OP13. However, in PRB2, I don't think this has a great home. People have experimented with it in Bonney. It's mostly just a side grade on a Roux. Can come down on 3, which is pretty good because your optimal curve involves only really having searchers on that 1 and 3 Don turn. Maybe you'll play a Tashigi, and then on the 5 Don turn, you'll be looking to play out something like a Cavendish or a 5-cost Smoker to start getting those annoying mid-range bodies on the board. Well, this Bonney being playable on 3 is a bit of an upgrade over a Roux. Obviously has much less power, but that power doesn't tend to come up. A Roux tends to not attack too much. So I think this Bonney is probably an upgrade on a Roux in the Bonney decks. Here's a sample Bonney list that is playing the new 3-cost Bonney if you want to check it out, although I'm not confident that this will become staple in the deck. Outside of Bonney, I don't see much home for this card right now, other than, again, perhaps in Red-Green Luffy in set 13. Another fairly specific card, we've got the new Luffy. The new Luffy is pretty cool option for GP, actually. This is mostly a downgrade in a vacuum on the 5-cost Bonney, but the fact that this can come down on 4 specifically is going to really interfere with a lot of decks that really like to play a specific card on 5. For example, if you're playing into a red-green Smoker, we've been talking about just now, and they want to play their 5-cost Smoker on 5, well, you play the Luffy, they've got to tap down one of their dons. That's really frustrating. And all of a sudden, they just can't play their 5-cost Smoker on curve, and you go so far ahead from that. Really valuable. Also, for example, into Bonney, if they want to play their Cavendish on 5, but you play this Luffy, well, all of a sudden they can't play that Cavendish anymore, which is going to set them back, again, like a whole turn, which is really, really powerful. I think this will become less powerful over the course of a game, but there will be turns later on where you really need to deny, I don't know, you need to deny a Rayleigh on 8 from a red deck like Shanks, and you drop this Luffy, and cool, they can't play their Rayleigh. Brilliant. I think the only home really for this is going to be in GP, and how popular this will be in GP sort of remains to be seen. Japan didn't have that long with these cards. Some lists were playing this, others weren't. Here's a list that I'd be looking to start with if I wanted to play GP and include this Luffy. But if you can get this early on in the game, I can see this being kind of a real game changer for green-purple Luffy in certain matchups. Another card that could be useful in a variety of different green decks is this new Zoro. Generically, just a decent 2k option. Having both Supernovas and Straw Hat Crew is quite good. I think this will see sort of on and off play in both GP Luffy, Green Zoro, and maybe even Bonney. I think all 3 of those decks could make use of this. However, it's not really a game changer. It's just one of a few different 2k options. In GP, this is certainly better than your third 2k of choice, which was usually something like Frenosuke. In Green Zoro, this is better than any of the vanillas that people were playing. And in Bonney, this is probably the least likely to see success there, because they already have slightly better 2k options than something like a Zoro or a GP. I think you'll likely see some players choose to play this, while others won't. If you're particularly worried about things like Dead Man's Game, or things like Hody Jones with your opponent going for game in green decks like GP and Zoro, then this Zoro will be a valuable consideration. Being able to just rest something like one of your searchers or a really large character that your opponent's not going to want to deal with anyway, instead of resting this, could come up in a pinch, but I don't think this is really going to be a game changer for any deck in particular. How the mighty have fallen. Gone is the Jinbei vault. And this Jinbei of Nu is not that great, I think. In a vacuum, this is pretty cool. It's a 4/5 1k searcher. It's sort of equivalent to something like a Zorojiro. Loses a little bit of power, but does gain counter, which is cool. And this is obviously intended for decks like Doflamingo and decks like Boa. I have seen a little bit more chatter around Doflamingo in set 13. However, I've not really seen too many results from him there just yet, so we'll have to see about that. But in set 12, I don't really have great hope for either of these leaders, sadly. I think the old Jinbei honestly probably could have been unbanned and it wouldn't have been broken right now with how the game's power crept in the last couple of sets. But I certainly don't think this Jinbei is really going to be pushing the needle. If you did want to play a build of something like Dofi, you could check out maybe a build like this that could perhaps make use of this Jinbei to try and increase their consistency. It is nice that his when attacking can just bottom a 1 to get you that draw with your Boa's leader effect. And I've also seen some discussion around whether or not this could be played in Sakazuki for the when attacking. My gut says probably not, but I think people will experiment with this in more of a Warlords themed build, which could be pretty cool to see. Now, a more exciting blue card is this new Marco. This is one of the best blue cards we've had in a while. A blocker that draws 2 on KO is just such a powerful idea, and I'm so pleased that now that Nami is gone, blue is finally getting to draw cards without jumping through these stupid hoops. It feels like the designers have gone crazy with the card draw since they decided to ban Nami, which, you know, I'm here for it. This Marco in particular, I think, is very likely to see play in a lot of blue decks. In OP13, we see it being incredibly important for red-blue ace. But in PRB02, I think the deck where this will likely make the most impact is something like blue-yellow Nami. Having both the Whitebeard tag and the Wano tag is pretty interesting because Nami's got quite a few Wano and Whitebeard cards that they already like to play. The Oden, again, it has both tags. Kikunojo is Wano, Hiyori is Wano, Jozu is Whitebeard. So I'm wondering whether you'd go down more of a Wano build or a Whitebeard build, or perhaps no Searcher at all. But both the blue Izo from Starter Deck 22 and the Yamato from the Yamato Starter Deck are both pretty solid Searchers with extra little bonuses built in. So I'm pretty excited to experiment with both a Wano and a Whitebeard build of Nami. Obviously, they're going to be playing a lot of the same cards. And if I was going to start, I'd perhaps be starting with a list a little bit like this. I think this is likely to replace Cavendish in Nami decks and sort of fit in alongside Kikunojo as one of your best 4-drops. But this guy is also just really good to drop later. Whereas both Cavendish and Kiku were not great after sort of your 6 or 8 Don turn. If you're dropping this on like 8 or 10, it's like, it's not great. But Marco, now that's a blocker that draws me 2 cards. I'll take that one. I think as the game progresses, this is very likely to be staple in a lot of blue decks as well. So if there's one that I would pick up, this is potentially the best card in the set for me. And moving on to perhaps not the best card in the set is this Mr. 3. He's got a really weird effect where a lot of blockers say that I can't be KO'd or I can't be removed from play. So people recently have been getting around that by having a lot of their end game plays be around resting. Be it an Usahachi, be it a Hody Jones, be it a Dead Man's Game. There's a lot of blockers getting rested at the minute. And this Mr. 3, well, he can be rested. But he sort of has a failsafe built in that when your opponent does, you at least get to draw some cards. And maybe that can help you out with a little bit of counter. I don't think this is likely to see a ton of play. Notably, in the Buggy deck, this is really bad. Because then you've got a card on your field with less than 5 cost. So your Buggy's condition's not met, which kind of sucks. But obviously this is not locked to Buggy, this is a generic card. And this could well see play in other decks, although right now I don't really have a home for this, I'm afraid. One card that I do have several homes for is this new 7-cost Pudding. This has breathed a bunch of life into not only the Katakuri deck, but also the Pudding deck. Both those decks kind of just felt like they were missing something. And whilst I don't see either of them becoming top tiers overnight, I think this Pudding really does help, both with the consistency and card draw of the decks, and also a little bit with raising the power ceiling just a touch. Obviously, the primary target for this is playing out your purple 8-cat, but don't forget you can also play out the yellow 8-cat in Pudding, and being able to cheat out that Kata alongside another unit even though her power is fairly weak, whilst refilling your hand with the 2 cards that you've just played, it's pretty damn good. Also just gives you another good play, even if in Katakuri, for example, you're playing this into a Paros Paro. Which is better than just playing a Paros Paro, right? Katakuri was sort of struggling for good cards, especially. And this Pudding really fills the hole quite nicely. I'm a big fan of this Pudding. I do currently have videos on the channel with both the Katakuri leader and the Pudding leader. There is a limit to how many cards I can put on screen in the video, but if you check out the description of the video, I'll have links to both the Pudding and Katakuri videos in there for you. Next up, we've got this Doflamingo, who's a little confusing. We do have 2 purple Don Quixote Pirates leaders, both Sugar and GP Dofi. Neither of them are doing amazing right now. I've been hearing a few murmurings about GP Luffy, but I'm not sure this is a significant buff for that deck anyway. The main place people were talking about this is in UP Luffy, and if you are on a heavy Don Quixote build with the Sugar Searcher, this is a second searchable ramp alongside Godthread. However, Godthread I think is this card's biggest usurper because that card is mostly just better than the 5-cost Dofi. I'd rather deal with my opponent's unit and ramp than have a blocker and ramp. And whilst this Dofi obviously does have counter, it's very specific and you can only really play it on a 5-Don turn. You obviously can't play it on 4. So it really is battling with Godthread for that spot. And the removal that Godthread provides can just be so valuable often in UP Luffy games that I don't see this Dofi seeing a ton of play. I must say in GP Dofi and Sugar, I don't really have a lot of experience with those decks. So if you're a GP Dofi main or a Sugar main, and you think this Doflamingo is a game changer for those decks, let me know in the comments. Next up, Purple Straw Hat buffs. We went one set without any Purple Straw Hat buffs, and they printed another one. What a time to be alive. Thankfully, this is just a simple searcher. but this has become a staple in GP builds. It's just more consistency in seeing your Sanji Pudding. That deck, when it doesn't draw Sanji Pudding on curve, man, it feels so much weaker than when it does. So having another 4 outs to do that is brilliant. This is also just another 1k, and that deck was sort of lacking in 1ks. So the fact that you're just naturally playing another 4 is pretty cool. And the trigger doesn't hurt too, because you're pretty greedy in taking your first couple of life, often with GP Luffy. Here's the same GP Luffy list that I showed earlier when we were talking about the 4-cost Luffy, just to show that it is also playing this new Nami Searcher. Alongside GP Luffy, there are obviously other Purple Straw Hat decks. I think Red Purple Luffy is likely to just play the 1-cost Nami. I don't think you ever really want more than that. Purple Black Luffy and Purple Luffy I think are interesting. For me in Purple Luffy, this is a no, because you really want to go first. So your curve just doesn't really have a time to play this. And the trigger's not going to come up very much as well, because you're taking your own life. So I don't really see this being all that great in Purple Luffy. In Purple Black, I think there are upsides and downsides compared to the 1-cost Law. Obviously, this search is a little bit deeper, searching the top 5 instead of the top 4, and notably, this can search Gum Gum Giant, whereas the Law cannot. However, the 2-cost is more expensive. Often in Purple Black, you'll have like a Rogue Don hanging around later on in the game from your leader effect that you could use then to play a Law. Having to invest 2 in this Nami is a bit more expensive. The trigger's nice, so I'm not really sure which I'd want to play between this and the Law. If you did want to play the Nami, you could try to build something like this, and you will have extra search for Gum Gum Giant, which is pretty damn nice. But I don't think it's going to be a game changer for Purple Black Luffy, in all honesty. I think the best home for this card is by far going to be GP. Moving on to black cards, and probably my favourite card of the set, even if I don't think it's the best, is the new 6-cost Moria. This is a replacement for the banned Moria, of course, the 8 cost. And I really love the design of this card. Letting you summon any 4-cost is great. The fact that it comes in rested, so you can't just abuse Rebecca, I love it. And the fact that you give a rested Don to your leader means that on 8, you can play this Moria, then use your Moria's leader effect to summon another 4-cost, effectively being a full replacement for the 8-cost Moria, except you get 2 4-costs as well as the 6-cost, instead of an 8-cost, a 4-cost, and a 2-cost. It's not going to be as good as the Moria, because Moria was good in Moria for a very short time. If that sentence makes any sense at all. Where Moria was better was obviously in like BY and Lucci. Those decks kind of just power crept Moria pretty damn quick. And without Ice Age as well, I think Moria is really going to struggle for reduction. He has gained a few new tools over the set since his release, like the 4-cost Ryuma. But yeah, this doesn't feel like a game changer for Moria. However, it is a significant buff. If you're a Moria enjoyer, this is a great card in the deck, make no mistake. And I am a Moria enjoyer, so I guarantee I'll be bringing this at least once to locals over PRB02. If you want to play Moria, there's a Moria list on your screen, and there is a Moria video linked in a card on your screen as well. And before I get the Perona copers in the comments, no, this doesn't change anything for Perona. This is not what that deck needed. It's going to give you slightly better access to Ryuma, but no, that deck needs like serious support, and I really hope she gets it because it's a cool leader, but this is nowhere near enough. Speaking of homeless cards, here's a homeless Sabo. Having left the Goa Kingdom, he joined the Rev Army, and he's not very good in the Rev Army decks right now. So obviously we did have the new Koala leader coming out in OP12 that would be a natural home for this, but you're never getting 15 or more in the trash in that deck. You're just never getting it. So he's a 6/6 2k blocker. Is that worth playing? Honestly, probably. It's probably better than like the Kuma with the trigger or any of the vanilla options that they were playing. However, it's really going to change almost nothing for Koala. The only decks that sort of get to that sort of range of 15 cards in trash right now are Lucci and Blackbeard. Blackbeard already has access to the Caribou, which is basically better. And I think in Lucci, the consistency of not always being at 15 will likely make this just a riskier pick than the Bartolomeo that they're currently playing. But I could see people experiment with this in Lucci, trying to replace the Bartolomeo with this new Sabo. Having that extra power is pretty cool. Being playable off Rebecca is pretty cool. So we'll see. However, if these are cheap, I would recommend grabbing yourself a playset, because this is very, very good in Red Black Sabo. That deck does develop more trash thanks to its use of the stage. And even if this is just a 6 cost, the fact that you can summon this off of your 8 cost dragon as like a bootleg version of the Secret Sabo, and it still becomes like a 7k blocker, it's not bad as like a little backup. And this is one of the better Rev Army 2ks in red or black for sure. There's also a fairly popular tech option in Emu. Emu's 2k slots are typically taken up by 4 of the Saint Shepherd Jupiter, often 4 of the Celestial Dragons 2k, who I can't remember his name right now. And then those last sort of 4 slots are between things like this, things like the Bartolomeo, and even the 1-cost Shirahoshi. Sometimes people like to play that one. However, you do fairly often see the Sabo in Emu. They get to 15 in trash, like, so fast, man. It's so quick. So this is usually better than Bartolomeo, although I will say, if you prefer consistency, I'd still maybe go with Bart. And having the extra cost being at 6, making him a lot harder to rest than Barto, is pretty cool. So for now, I think he's kind of homeless, but as soon as OP13 comes out, this guy is going to get more expensive, so I'd potentially look to pick up your copies now. One card that's certainly not homeless, in fact he has a very well-defined home, is Shiryu. This is a Blackbeard card. It's locked to Blackbeard. What else to say? This is like a Blackbeard version of the hack blocker from set 12 that they designed for Koala. Is this going to push the needle on Blackbeard? I don't think it's going to push it too much. However, this is quite a nice option. I think this is mostly just a strict upgrade on the San Juan Wolf that you occasionally saw at like 1 or 2 copies. I'm not sure this Shiryu is going to come in and just instantly be a 4-of, because there are a lot of decks that don't rely on low-cost characters. However, if you're a Blackbeard player and you're struggling with something like a Rayleigh deck, this is really good into Rayleigh. I am by absolutely no means a Blackbeard player, so here's a Blackbeard list that I stole from gumgum.gg that is choosing to make use of this Shiryu if you want to test it out. I don't think this is going to be a significant buff for him, but it will make your Rayleigh matchup probably a bit better if you choose to play this card. Next up, back to a bit more of a generic card in this new 2K Otama. So this being Wano country, obviously your mind immediately goes, oh, Yamato. And I think this will be an okay option in Yamato. Obviously searchable off things like your Momo and your Yamato. 1 cost is pretty cool, but there are already a couple of really good Wano 2Ks in the Yamato. They can play the 1 cost Otama that can be like an emergency searcher. Izo is a classic, it's still good, all the way back from set 1. And the new Kin'emon can be a pretty cool trigger. And this extra 3000 power at the cost of a life isn't too game-changing. But when you're going for lethal, this can just be an extra 1000 power, which is not something to overlook. I could also see this seeing play in a Wano build of blue-yellow Nami. Obviously searchable off your Yamato. There are less searchable 2Ks in blue and yellow than green and yellow, especially with the Kin'emon being type locked. And the taking of that life card will of course proc your Nami's leader effect to let you draw a card, which is a nice little bonus. So if you wanted to try this in a Wano Nami build, there's one on your screen that you could try out. There's also maybe an argument that you could play this in an L, but I don't think it's that great there. Could be a nice early game play though, that if your opponent starts leaving you at 2, well, maybe you can tap the Otama, get the life, get a heal with something like one of your Anels or Yamato, and get some use out of her like that, although I don't think this is that crazy for an L. As we look ahead to OP13, the deck this is really, really good in is Yellow Bonney. Because Yellow Bonney gets to give 2 rested Dons when you play a character with a trigger, this Otama just acts as a 3k buff at the end of the game, which is insane. Bonney, at least in the build that I was playing in the Bonney video that I've done on the channel, is quite aggressive, and this extra 3k buff at the end of the game can really come up. Speaking of generic cards, Boa Hancock. This is obviously very, very powerful into Green Zoro. Because Green Zoro relies on having their leader be able to attack. And this, in a similar way to something like the 4-cost Arlong from set 6, just stops their leader from attacking for a turn. And that turn into a deck that relies so heavily on their leader can really just turn the whole game on its head. So if you're playing a yellow deck but you're struggling into Zoro, this Boa could be a really valuable inclusion. My main problem is most yellow decks are pretty good into Zoro. Both Kid and Anel typically have pretty good win rates. Maybe you could play this in blue-yellow Nami, but blue-yellow Nami isn't playing that many trigger cards, especially if you're looking to more of like a Wano or Whitebeard build. You might look to cut some of the trigger cards. So I'm not sure this Hancock has a perfect home right now. Looking ahead again, it looks like a pretty staple card in the yellow Bonney deck in set 13. And if you're playing like a more rogue or off-meta yellow deck, but you're really struggling with the green Zoro matchup, I think this Hancock is a really decent one to include. It's not like it's dead into other matchups. I mean, freezing their leader or a character is always a pretty good effect. It just happens that into Zoro, it's so much better. And last up, we have the Ace, and this is probably the card I've got the least experience with, because obviously this is a buff for all three of the brothers' decks, the Luffy, the Ace, and the Sabo, from ST13, and I've not yet played with this in any of them. I have looked through quite a lot of Japanese data from their PRB format, and it doesn't look like this has really pushed the needle on any of them. However, I think for especially Ace and Luffy, this is a really significant buff. Sabo already kind of had a few decent rogue builds, and I don't think this Ace changes too much, because some of Sabo's builds weren't even playing the Kingdom cards, although this will perhaps give you more reason to play those cards in Sabo. In BY Luffy, this is going to increase your consistency of being able to go to 9k. Being able to reuse your little baby guys was really what that deck needed. Ever since the loss of Moria, it's just felt incomplete. So having access to this Ace for a bit more consistency, I think we will probably see some success from BY. Western players seem to love BY a lot more than the Eastern players. Don't know why. We saw that sort of trend in our results for the sets before Moria was banned. And I imagine there will be at least a couple BY cooks who try and cook something up with him once we get this new Ace. For blue-yellow Ace, I think this kind of makes that deck not just a joke. It's another 5 cost to increase your consistency of not just whiffing off your leader effect. And the fact that you could, for example, use your leader effect, then play this Ace, summon whichever brother from the trash that you need, it's just going to increase your consistency by so much. Is it going to push the needle on Ace? No, it's definitely... He's not going to be meta. But for the Ace enjoyers, I think this could be a really decent buff for that deck, you know? So that's my quick roundup of all the new cards in PRB02, and a whole bunch of deck lists to get you started. Are these lists going to be perfect? No, obviously not. However, I think they're all pretty good starting places for these decks, and I'm really looking forward to another mix-up on the format. It feels like every sort of few weeks at the moment, we're getting some sort of mix-up. We got the ST22 just a couple of weeks back with the Whitebeard deck, which didn't change a lot, but that Odin is decent in a couple of decks, you know. It's decent in Kuzan, and it's decent in Nami. But thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments what's your favourite new card from the set. For me, my favourite is the Moria. I think the best is that 4-cost marker, and that card's a ton of fun too. Don't get me wrong. I've been Joe, drink of the days and inches apple cider, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.